to put in there, but it's pagination is fine. It's good. The way we do it at the moment often is a bit dumb, and that's what I'd like to address. So yeah, I'm a full stack developer. I've been doing it for 20 years or so, and I guess like a lot of people, I just kind of assumed that the way that we did pagination was just kind of the way you did it. It's just, a page size and an offset. You just, work your way through the pages. But there is another way of doing it that we're seeing, particularly in environments where data is moving fast, and theoretically that's everyone's environment these days, right? Everyone's apps are more connected and sending more transactions, and more stuff is going back and forth and stuff. So the old ways don't necessarily make sense anymore. So let's talk about a new way of doing it, using cursors. So I was talking to my new coworker, Ryan, about this, and he said, oh, you mean like Postgres cursors, right? And I was like, no, like that's not what I was thinking of. Like I wasn't thinking about pushing the thing that I want to do down into the database. It's still basically the same thing. We're talking about trying to have a more stable result set by changing the way that we talk back and forth for the data. But I'm going to do it in the application layer in a slightly different way to get very much the same sort of result, to try and get ultimately a stable set of all of the results that you want to look at. So it's not this. Think much more Twitter's API for collecting tweets, and you'll see why that sort of is relevant pretty soon. So super simple, dumb Rails app. It's just I've got. Does anyone, hands up, who knows Ian M. Banks, the author? Yeah, one hand. Awesome. Okay. Just kind of expected. Yeah, I mean, the new diverse Ruby community, we're not all sci-fi nerds. We're not all introverts, closeted introverts, sort of. Yeah, anyway, we're not all introverts. We're not all sci-fi nerds. Ian Banks is a genre author. He writes a series of sci-fi novels in the universe called The Culture, under the name Ian M. Banks, just to be contrary. These are the novels that he wrote. He passed away, unfortunately. He's a really cool guy. Lots of Scottish author, and yeah, the Wasp Factory and stuff is his non-science fiction stuff, and then the Culture series is these sci-fi novels. They're really, really good. I can't recommend them highly enough. So anyway, we've got a list of these books. We've got a seed script that just reads the books and shoves them into the database. And so let's just run that, shall we? GB seed. Yeah. Okay. Here's our. Yep. Okay. Cool. So, pagination. 3 pages, as you can see up there. I've moved it to the top. It's traditionally at the bottom, but I've moved it to the top, making it a little more visible. We get 4 elements on a page, and yeah, he's writing in 1987. He's writing in 1989. He's writing in 1998, 2008, and then the Hydrogen Sonata 2012. Cool. So like this works fine. Yeah, like, and I mean, if we add another, so just do it in the console, it's easiest. Here we go. I just shove another book in there. We got state of the art is down there. Cool. Let's jump to the, wait a minute. I just jumped to the second page, but the last element from the previous page is on the start of this page. That's a bit shit. Like I know probably the seasoned developers in the room have seen me insert something and I've screwed up the order in the pagination, and they say, well, the pagination's just changed and you just can't help it. And it's just like, it's a bad user experience, but we can't do better. And that's just what we've been telling people when we do pagination for a long time. But that's not true. Like, that's just an artifact of the fact that our controller looks like this. So we've got, we grab a page number that we're going for. We do an offset, which is the page that we want times the page size. And then we just, grab all those books. We also grab a total so that we know how many pages to put in the interface, and the total number of pages for that as well. And yeah, like this is, most apps are mostly this, right? When people work in Rails, they, you have a list of results, the list is too long, you put pagination and it looks like this. It's such a common thing that there's many gems that do this, like Pagey and Kaminari and stuff, and they all basically have this logic inside them. Okay, so what could we do that's better? Well, we could use cursors. Ultimately, the things that people want from this behavior are, let's go back to first principles. We want to get to the start of the list. We might want to get to the end of the list. That seems like a useful thing to be able to do. We want to be able to go from page to page. So if I'm on page 1, I might want to go to page 2 to see like the next thing. And I'm how many pages there are, or jumping to page 13 of 22. Like that's a very weird use case. But we'll talk about that a bit in the future. Maybe we can do that as well. Ultimately, what we want to do is just sort of navigate around. That's what users want to do. So, all right, let's see what we can do in terms of getting that behavior. So my controller has this helper down here that is collecting some search queries. And what we're going to do is we're going to start talking about the page of results after a particular time, or a page of results before a particular time. I'm using the created at because, I could use the published year, but what happens if the author publishes 2 books in 1 year? Then we have a question of like, which book constitutes the start of this, the books for 2008, like it can be a little bit confusing. So something like created at is like a really nice key for this, but turning it into sort of a set, a temporal stream of information that we can navigate back and forth in between. Now, to make this a little bit clearer, like you can see, I've got the created at there and I've got it down to the second. Can be a little bit confusing to work with. So those eagle-eyed people might have noticed in my seeds, I actually sleep for a tenth of a second just to push it out a little bit more, to make it a little bit more visible in some places. But that's just a hack for that, to make it a little bit easier to read. Doesn't help here, of course, because these are all, as you can see, they're all exactly the same second. But theoretically, if we jump to the 24, jump back to the start, yeah, the numbers are different for the created at back here. So anyway, that's why that's like that. Another thing that's a little bit strange is that I'll get to that in a second. Cool. Okay, so if I've got my controller here, and it's able to, let's grab this one. I don't know if anyone saw me asking about this on the Slack. I was like, it looks really dumb mucking around with commented code like this. Has anyone got a better idea? And I didn't hear an idea that grabbed me more than just my stupid comment.
We had a great idea, but thought let's not do it so we can watch him do it.
So I'm getting query parameters in my helper that you saw. So this is still limit, page size. It's still order by created at, like the previous example. But now we're asking for created at greater than this after value and created at less than this before value. And we now have this idea of like a first book and a last book drawn from the result set. And we'll get into that a bit more in the future. So that's the controller. Let's have a look at so we're going to have some different pagination links, and they're generated in this helper. So my old pagination links are literally just, from 1 to total pages, link to book path page. But this is my new one. This is got a link to the oldest set of results, a link to the a set of results older than the current set, a link to the set newer than the current set, and a link to the newest. And that they all use this cursor path thing, which for the simple case just does books path, which is just the Rails URL helper. All right, so that should, and there we go. So we got the regular page. Now we can go, so you can see the book that I added, the unknown one, just wedged in the start to screw up the results. That's why that's there. But then we can go newer, and we can step through the results going newer, 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 which is cool. So we've got the behavior that we had previously. Awesome. But this can't get screwed up by someone injecting something at the top, because as you can see up here, this is after this particular date, which is the end of the previous page, the entry that was at the previous page. So we will always get a stable result for this that is the next page logically after the previous one you saw. So already we've done better than what we were getting previously, and we can just keep going newer until we get to the last page of results. And then if we say newest, though, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. Now, I should say a little thing in here. Rails by default, when you render a date as a string, only goes to the second. Now you know that my created ats are stacked with 0.1 of a second with that sleep. So I'm actually getting, if I use second granularity, this would screw up. And so you'll notice that these actually, it's a little hard to see encoded in the URL. These actually go down to a millisecond accuracy. And the way I did that, you might see in here, I'm doing created at ISO 86016. Like, this is just an unfortunate side effect of me choosing to do the pagination in this particular way. But it's really useful to remember that Rails has all of these awesome helpers to just stringify a date, except it doesn't do what you need in every case. So you often, like, you'll find weird edge cases where Rails helpers fuck you over. Be aware you might need to go a little deeper. So yeah, cool. So we're saying all of these are like, go oldest, we go newer. These are all after. So we're working our way forward from the start of the set. We're saying, the first page, and then after the last record of the first page, and then after the last record of the next page. But how do we do newest? Because we don't know how big the set is necessarily. So you'll see here, we're doing before, and we're sorting descending. So we're actually working our way backwards from the end of the set, which, depending on how you want to engage with this API, this system, that might actually be super useful as well, because you can have artifacts at the other end of the set as well with traditional pagination. You won't get with this because you can start at the end and work your way back. So that's pretty cool. So we can say newer, older, oh, wait a minute, we go newest, and then we go older, older, and we keep working back. Now, one thing that's slightly, I don't know if you would immediately intuitively sense this, but this introduces a slightly odd case where, because we're working backwards from the end of the set, because we were inverting the sort order, the results are going to come back in the opposite order. So it's going to, as we come back from the other end, the results are going to be the other way around. So you'll notice in line 28 here, we're actually reversing the results for the case where the sort parameter is descending, so that the view in the page is stable. It always looks the same in the page, but depending on which direction you're navigating, you're sorting them in a different direction and stepping through page by page. So that's an interesting use case to keep an eye on if you're going to try and go both ways. People don't necessarily try and go both ways. That's it.
Why do you need to use the date? Why can't you just use your ID if the ID is something?
IDs don't promise to be sortable. IDs don't promise to be monotonic. And
they don't, if you choose to say, I want to sequentially order,
you could.
Default ID,
so I particularly in this, like, you could theoretically do it,
yeah.
But I particularly in this example wanted to pick something that, well, particularly in line with the Twitter example, IDs, like if they get edited, like and you're using the updated at date, then the IDs are no longer a good match for when things map. Yeah, but if you want them ordered by updated, then it doesn't necessarily have the correct behavior anymore. So that's what I wanted for this example. Having unique identifiers for your records and having a logical sortable key is something that people often stuff into the same field and then regret it. And so sometimes you can do it, but often it's better to be honest about which is which. And UUIDs have had their place. Created dates have their place. Updated dates have their place. And use case depends entirely on like what you want to do. But yes, and if you have monotonic IDs, sometimes you might want to use them as a tiebreaker if two things are created at exactly the same time. Like created at makes no promises of being unique. So sometimes you might want a tiebreaker. And so you can even see down here, I've got ID sort parameter as well as like a, maybe we want this as a tiebreaker. Cool. So have I convinced you cursors are awesome? Like this is the right way to this particular pattern is the right way to do it.
Just one other thing on that though. Make sure if you're going to do this, that you store in your database, you store the 6 precision.
Yes.
Does it show that up in the schema, or if you've got schema RB, so it probably doesn't?
Yeah, I don't think it shows it in the schema.
For those who are trying to understand what I'm talking about, when you create a datetime field in the database, you can choose how precise it is. By default, the updated date in Rails on Postgres is 6 decimal digits after the second. So we'll go to microseconds.
Yeah.
But you could change that to 0, which would be to the closest second, at which point this would be potentially less effective if you were had updates.
Great.
And it might be platform dependent.
My colleague discovered this morning.
Oh dear. Yeah.
Run it on other platforms.
Yeah, well, I didn't choose WSI, so
So this information is it's not really part of our public API, right? Like we do have like the before and the sort order and stuff in the URL, but those aren't things we expect people to actually use. What we expect people to do is you click our links, or if this was an API, we could put a blob of information in our API response saying, here's the results. And if you want to navigate to other pages of results, here's, a little bit of information. And that's something that you see commonly, like the Twitter API has that. It has, here's 20 tweets. And if you want to go to earlier tweets, here's a blob of information you need, and here's a blob of information. So maybe let's have a go at that. Maybe we can do that. So let's try just stuffing it into a JSON object. That seems like a thing that could work. We'll say, we'll JSON parse the thing, and we'll grab some JSON and we'll parse it. Sounds good. Okay. Now, so if we go for newer, now you can see like it's becoming less readable, which is a virtue because this is not for customers to read. So the more opaque it is, the better, really. Like we don't want this to be a thing that they get in and fiddle with and try and get different behavior from. In fact, you know what? It's still too translucent. It's still too transparent. Like we don't want them to be able to understand what this is at all. Let's base 64 encode that JSON blob, and they can just not even they can have just a excuse me while I fight my keyboard. Let's do some base 64 stuff, and so we go newer, and now we have just this opaque ID. And now if you look at the Twitter API, this is basically what you get. You get something like this, which is just an opaque blob of information. You say, oh, why, in the spirit of openness, why hide this from users? Well, this opaque ID can have anything in it, particularly if you encrypt it, which means as you refine your API, as you improve the way this behaves, you can put different information, optimizations, different flags and things into this opaque JSON blob that you give to the customer. You say, you can use this to get information, but I'm ultimately the arbiter of whether it's valid and what we can do with it. And really, you can only get them from me. So I will give you, in my API say, I will give you a page of results, and I'll give you, here's the cursor you need to go to the previous page of results. Here's the cursor you need to go to the next page of results. And they are my cursors, and they're now, theoretically, and I've seen this done, these can be IDs to saved searches in a database. That's another strategy that people use. That's, you know, but that's invisible to this. Like you can't tell if that's what I'm doing or if I'm doing something else. And that's kind of good. Like ultimately, this is I'm enclosing the information that I need to serve you entirely for my own use. So yeah, that's when you hear people talking about cursors in this sort of behavior, you'll often see a blob, a binary blob like that, and that's sort of what people think of often. So I do when I think of like cursors for this kind of thing. Yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to cover. Any questions?
How does this work with infinite scroll?
This works perfectly with infinite scroll. Thank you for that very generous question. Because when you start your app, maybe you think there are 10 pages of results, but by the time the person scrolled down a few pages, there could be 20 pages of results. And this remains stable in the face of that, whereas a traditional paginated sort of interface could quite possibly not be able to handle it.
I'll probably add to Michael's comment. Why asking about infinite scroll is more of accessibility. Because one of the feedback that I got from accessible consultants, infinite scrolls are really bad for disabled people, so you should probably try to stick with pagination. Because once you use speech to text, it messes it up.
So traditional pagination is pretty poor in terms of accessibility, because like if you're a person who's doesn't have good sight, and you've got and it just says there's 100 pages of results, and you're looking for a particular person whose name that is, you know, in those results, hunting through those pagination links, through, you know, 100 pagination links, and saying, I want page 64. No, his name's not on that one. 65, if there's not a search or something. But if we add pagination links that are based on like the first letter of someone's name, they can go through and say, I want George. I go to the page, I start at page G, and then say next page, next page, next page, to go down until I find George. Like you can make usability and accessibility better with a strategy like this.
You're around that. Right?
Huh?
Do binary searches. Find something important.
This is not a failure of me. This is a failure of the system that you're using. Whoever's built that system has poorly served you, and you should be getting, you know, pages that are based something. Pagination is based on something meaningful. Yeah, year blocks, letter blocks, you know, something like that. And then a tool like a technique like this allows efficient navigation, stable navigation in between the pages you get from a system like that.
Sort of two sense nested pagination where you have big blocks of the same.
Yeah.
Blocks, you have these sets of pages.
Yeah.
But the order doesn't change just because you navigate the white numbers.
Yeah. 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 One other thing I wanted to say about this, about it being stable, but yeah. Humans tolerate that extra record turning up on the next page. Computers don't. So this is really good for APIs. Because yeah, if a computer sees that same record on 2 subsequent pages, it doesn't know it's because a new record has been introduced at the top. And you'll just end up with duplication or awkward deduping code. Whereas if you use a cursor-based approach, theoretically you can get stable results, and you can write very simple code to just run through all the pages, which is how the Rage archives now work and why the code needs to, for rage, again, needs to be updated. That's just a fluke that I stumbled across that at the same time.
Follow-up question. This may be a contradiction.
Mhm.
What's your opinion?
I mean, JWTs are basically just big signed blobs of information. And so, I mean, this is not signed, but it is just a blob of information. So a JWT, like it's a little bit strange because that's not sort of what people usually use JWTs for, but there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't. Because signing these is a good idea because that then gives you some confidence of what you're going to find inside it. Because this is still just, this currently is just base 64 encoded JSON. And anyone within, for 5 seconds is going to decode, JSON parse. Hey, I see what they've got in there. Cool.
URL. Page size. Very fair.
Well, yes, but that should also be that should also be part of the URL, and so that you can tune the amount that you want. That should naturally go not part of the system. It can naturally be part of the cursor, and so everyone can get the page size that they want. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just curious, are there any good ways to compress? This is more of a general URLs question now, but is it visual? Any way to compress that down to something that's not carnage?
So part of the reason that's big is because it's JSON. Part of the reason it's big is because it's a high fidelity date time. And both of those things can be modified with using other encoding methods. They have to be URL stable if you're going to put it in the URL. But yeah.
I understand you can't put it in the body of the request, but then make it bookmark that.
Well, yeah.
Save as a search.
Well, and this is an alternative strategy that people use is to actually write it into the database as a record, that blob of information, and then reference that with a short ID.
Have you ever actually needed to encrypt the request? I guess the ultimate question was, do you think that the built-in Rails encryption would be suitable for this particular use case?
Yeah, I mean, the encryption in Rails does the job, and this is the job that it could do. Yeah.
That was part of the reason why I asked, is it JWT, so you can apply specific tokens where you can encrypt your own search and know which client is generating that search.
One nice thing about using a JWT is because it's a much more broad standard. If you decide to pull this search service out and put it in a subservice, you can send a JWT down to the subservice and just say, I don't know, like they're trying to search, and here's all the information I have, and then that service is like, oh, I happen to know that that's a JWT. Unpack it. I got the keys, and I can do the search and give you the result back. So standardizing, always a good thing. You're right.
It seems like it'd be pretty easy to make a reusable, like Rails gem to do all of this, actually.
Yeah, that seems like a good idea. Someone should do that.
People ready to finish up yourself without telling us.
So looking at the Twitter API is the place where I learned about cursor-based searching. Then a couple of years later, I was working at a company used to be called Trunk, and we had Mongoid in front of MongoDB, and so I wrote a little gem that did most of the brains of this in terms of like understanding like a descending series of sort keys that you can then stick in the URL, and how to set the bounds and stuff. I will say something vaguely tangentially interesting that so I reopened the time class and stuck this oldest method in there with my best guess of like the biggest date that a Rails time might comfortably be, which is like 9,999 year 9,999 and some time. So that, because the easiest way to write this code is to say, I want all the records before a certain time and after a certain time, and then default time to 0 at the after as time to 0, and the oldest as time to oldest, the before as time to oldest. That way you're always getting this like stable range of time that you're checking, and then you just move the bounds in based on the search criteria. So that's like
9,999.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It feels weird to do it. And yeah, because you think of stuff like that and you think no one's gonna hit that, but is there a better solution? So your homework, message me on the Ruby Australia Slack channel with a better way of doing the biggest time applicable that isn't just going time.at with a big number. Theoretically, that might be a thing. I don't like to look at the database in setup code. That's the way people break half my migrations with stupid, clever, oh, I'm going to use a value from the database as part of my migration. And then, yeah, the whole thing explodes in people's faces. So yeah, setup code and database queries, I generally try to avoid. But if you had a standard value that you knew was appropriate for your database, that might be a good thing to use.
I could read the actual
Oh, sorry.
numerical value, but is that integer max or is that just something you select?
So I went time parse 9999999 to I.
So that's not int max.
No. And yeah, I don't know if that would be a suitable thing to use. So, yeah. Well, this never goes into the database as a stored value. It's only ever as a search query. There's probably something in SQL where there probably is.
Oh,
Slack me.
one issue with the code. Can you bring
Yeah.
up the C's file?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So for what you're doing, great. Destroy all and push it all in.
Yep.
But if you're building a production Rails app, the purpose of seed is not to just seed it once. The purpose of seeds is to be able to re-add things and reseed it anytime you want. So in general, I'm against this use of seeds.
Do you use seeds on production?
Yeah, for sure.
I tend to advise.
Monday, yeah, like Monday, boom, beautiful.
So, okay, so
Yeah,
the reason we use seeds is, let's say you want some predefined seed data.
Yeah,
You say,
that's what it's
these
for.
are the days of the week.
Yeah,
These are the months of the year.
Yeah.
These are the valid holidays, whatever you choose, and you've decided we want to put it in there.
Mm.
What I would highly recommend is that you always do find and create. And with UUID5, you can actually have, you can actually create predetermined UUIDs. So you can actually just say, right, create the UUID for the user Michael, because we always need one of those. And it means, and especially even if you're doing a demo project, halfway through, you go, oh my God, I wish I just had default admin users. You can add them to the seed file and just go, boom, they get created.
You can always just drop the database if you're destroying all.
And then we got like.
I actually have oh, and as a bonus, everyone knows Rails Runner, right? Yeah. So Rails Runner is a thing where you can run a simple Ruby command in the equivalent of running the console without having to open the whole console.
One of the best thing about Rails Runner is you can then cut and paste code and give it to somebody. So run this. And where do I run it? So just run it.
Literally in the command line. Yeah, in the project. Just, yeah, you don't need to do anything clever. Cool. All right. Thanks for your time.